everyone. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for this session. As the Vice President of R&D at Formation Ag, Corbett Hefner is an expert in the field of equipment solutions, harvesting and processing hemp and CBD oil. Today, he's going to talk with you about cost-effective and cutting-edge technologies that help farmers plant, grow, harvest, and process hemp to increase yield per acre. If you have questions during the presentation, don't be afraid to go ahead and click that link at the bottom of your screen. If you hover over, you'll see a Q&A link, and we'll be getting to that towards the end of the session. His full presentation will be available to you at the end of the day. All the sessions will be available to you, and you'll get an email about that. If you want to access all of the links or any of the information, you can at hempfarmingexpo2020.com. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corbett to get us started on our session.
Thanks, Kim. I'll go ahead and start my presentation. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Here we go. All right. Kim said, Corbett Hefner here, Formation Ag. We've been in business. This is our 5th year of innovating, harvesting, and processing techniques for hemp specific equipment. We're in Monte Vista, Colorado. Last year in this area, there was over 20,000 acres of hemp in here. So we get a lot of access to different hemp crops. We travel all over the country and get to see a lot of different cultivation practices, farming practices, and different genetic selections. So we get a wide range of hemp fields to get to have our equipment in. We'll start talking about harvesting. I'm going to go a little quick here so you can get questions later, but there's a lot of information. First thing I tell people when you want to be in hemp and talking about harvesting is plan now. Actually, should have planned 3 or 4 months ago. How are you going to harvest this crop? With today's price points, I was looking at the Pan Exchange website. Midpoint crop is in the 50 to 77 cents per point range. So can you make money in this? Is this a good crop for you? I like to tell people this is a very good rotation crop. This isn't a one thing on your farm kind of a deal. You want to have good crop rotation practices. Do you have a sale for your crop? What is your goal? Do you want to do grain? Do you want to do the oil, the cannabinoids? Do you want to do fiber processing, smokable hemp? What is your end goal? Can you monetize this crop? And can you farm it at a price where it's going to be a good payback for your farm? You need to have contacts with your customers. What do they want the crop to look like? Do they not want any stem? No seeds? How big are the particles? Big thing that caught some people this year was these extractors couldn't take the crop at the time that you harvested it. Now you have to store it. So, if you've harvested in October and they can't take it till June, what are you going to do with that crop in the interim? So I'm going to start talking a little bit about harvesting grain. A little picture here about grain. Here's hemp hearts and the normal seed, different uses for grain most people know about. What does it take to make a quality hemp product? I always tell people start with the sale and work backwards. If you can't sell your crop, there's no sense putting it in the ground. So what in the area that you want to play in, what is the market demanding? What do people want? Only plant what you can afford to plow under. So what's your risk tolerance? If you've only got a little bit of money that you're willing to risk, can you grow an acre? Can you grow 1,000 acres? If you got $10,000 to risk, that's one size. If you got $1 million, that's another. But you have to understand your risk tolerance when you're farming hemp and what you want to do. Can you supply quality hemp? What does that mean? Can you get a food safe product to your customers? If you're doing grain and you're just going to make it into dehulled hemp hearts, there's not a kill step like you're baking bread. There's no heat applied to that. So you need to understand that. What is your good management practice for your farm? What principles are you farming? GAP, Primus, AIB, you need to understand that. Because remember, somebody's going to consume this product. It's not like wheat or corn or something where it's going to go in storage and somebody's going to process it for the most part. Planning ahead, you got to properly plan this. What's your economic approach? What's your harvest plan? What's your storage practice? kind of hit on that. Most hemp, whether you're doing grain or flour, you need to dry it in some capacity to make sure you can store it. So, there's some options here. Can you field dry it? That's a pretty neat option because it's very inexpensive, but there were some fields here that got cut down last year and we got 2 inches of snow on it over a weekend. So it sat, now it's got mold on it. You can hang dry. That's what I mean by air drying in a building. That's the traditional way of doing it. But do you know how much space you need to hang dry a crop? If you're doing whole plants, you need roughly 44,000 cubic feet to hang it. If you're throwing it on the ground with airflow underneath it, it takes about 18,000 cubic feet. So you need to be aware of that, planning ahead again. Can you mechanically dry it? You have belt dryers, rotary dryers, turbine drying. I'll show you a picture of a negative pressure thing that we did this year. We're going to have some drying solutions for you at the end of the year too, smaller capacity stuff. If you're going to purchase a dryer, how big of one do you need? If you've got just a few acres, you can get away with a machine that runs 200 pounds an hour. If you're going to do 2,000 acres, that's a different size. If you're growing grain, you're going to need drying bins. When you harvest hemp grain, you do it when about 10% of the crop is ready. So you got to get through that crop, get it dried so that you can get it down to storage moisture temperatures. What's your budget for that drying? A lot of these dryers, there's a capital expenditure cost, but then there's the installation cost. If you have to pour a slab, if you have to pull power, if you have to put gas tanks in there to feed this thing or run a natural gas line in, need to plan for those things up front. What's the cost of that commodity to run it? Are you going to have to truck it very far? Those are things to think about. Storage, do you need to rent a warehouse? Do you need to keep it cool? If you're doing fiber, you've got a plan to take the tops off if you let it go to grain. If you've never let it go to grain and you're pulling it for a true fiber crop, you got to cut it, let it ret, and then bale it and store it. You want to try to keep it from getting molded after that. Hemp is still phototrophic. I always throw this slide in when I talk. This was a grain crop that was planted and it went to the reproductive phase on June 21st, just showing you that it is a daylight sensitive plant. I've seen autoflower plants go to flower right away too. So just something to be aware of. So let's talk a little bit about the harvesting part of this thing. Here's a grain plant. You got to really watch your hemp, and when it's time to harvest for grain, you better be ready with your machinery to go. You're going to harvest hemp when probably 10 to 20% of it's ready to be harvested. The moisture content's getting low. Be aware that you can crack the seed coat because it's fairly thin, and then to get it into storage moisture, you need to get it down to about 10% to be safe. Now here between 8 and 9, 10% in our areas, they'll store it. If you're going to be a true grain hemp farmer, you can collect it in a normal combine. Not that big a deal. Just don't take a whole lot of the stock into the machine. I'll show you some pictures why you don't want to take a lot of stock in. If you're going to farm grain and you want to catch some of the flour material, this is a machine that we build back here, this black machine. This is a big vacuum cart that we build. We call it the grasshopper. This is a 20 cubic meter collection cart. It is drawing a vacuum out of the back of the combine here, and we collect it without an impeller. Nothing ever touches the crop, and it goes into the hopper. This is a 20 cubic meter storage machine, and it'll collect. You'll dump this cart at about the same time you dump your grain bin in your combine. It's a tip type cart, so it'll empty out in about 2 minutes for the whole cycle up and down. Program in the truck height and walk away from it. This machine's got a motor on it, so it's self-powered, self-contained. Some combines are bigger. We also can hook these behind a tractor, and the tractor can power it if it has enough hydraulic flow. It's a really neat machine, and it collected 100% of the chaff out of the back of that combine at 5.5 miles an hour with a 36-foot head on it, and then they also ran it with a 42-foot grain head. So it's got a lot of capabilities, and you can tow that with a 1-ton pickup to move fields if you want. A few combine settings if somebody's interested in them. Kim said these presentations are available at the end here, so I'll go through that in detail. Here's what can go wrong, right? You're a grain farmer. This is the drive shaft on that John Deere combine. There's a bunch of hemp wrapped on it. Here's how they fix that. PVC pipe and duct tape. So here's the pipe they put on it, and here's the duct tape to cover that joint. Speed sensor on one of the vertical augers that takes the grain into the tank. Hemp fiber wrapped around there and snap the sensor off of there. Chaff spreader, chopper deal, wrapping around the bearing. If hemp has a place to wrap on something when you're harvesting, it's going to do it. Here's how they fixed it. They bolted on a piece of rubber on here to push the fiber out of that area. When you're combining and it's a little bit drier, be aware that hemp is flammable. The dust in the fiber can get hot and it catches on fire. Nice thing is it will smoke before it actually catches on fire, so you can see it and get it put out. So I always like to remind people that hemp is a flammable machine or material. Here's an example of some grain drying bins. You usually fill the bins a third to a halfway full because the hemp seed is so small, the air can't flow through it like it does in wheat or barley. You'll pump this, clean this up or dry it for a day, move it so you don't get a hot spot into another bin, dry it again. And then usually by the second or third day, it should be dry enough to store. Fiber, if you're going to do the dual crop or tri-crop, or if you're specifically growing fiber, this is some machinery. We call it our 660 fiber track machine. This is just an example of, here's some of the hurd, the woody core that people want to use for hempcrete. And then here's some examples of the fiber that come out of our machinery and some of the possible uses for those things. We spend a lot of time on fiber extraction equipment. We've worked on it for, this is our 5th year. We've been building decorticators since the beginning. To the best of our knowledge, we made the first decorticator in the US, predecessor to this machine. This is the 660. We built 5 years ago. As far as we know, since Slickton built one in the early 1900s. So this is a roller breaker style machine. These are the rollers in here that break the fiber down. This guy over here is the touch screen, so you can program the speeds of every roller that's in the machine. This one's just sitting in our shop. We were doing some testing with it. It's a very large piece of machinery, heavy, weighs over 11,000 pounds, but it takes that much force to break down hemp. It is not easy to break down at all. And again, if hemp can wrap on something, it'll wrap. So this machine actually splits the frame, so you can go in there to remove wraps, or if you need to change a bearing or something, you can. Talk a little bit about CBD and cannabinoid harvesting now. I always like to ask people, what are you actually growing if you're an oil farmer? People just think they're growing the foliage, and that's actually not what you're doing. If you're growing for CBD or CBG or whatever the topic is of the day, this little droplet of oil on top of the stalk, that's what you're going after. All these little droplets, so you can see them, they're exposed on the outside of the plant. They're not protected by a seed coat. There's no husk. There's nothing along that line to protect it. So this is the kind of stuff that we use when we engineer machinery, so that you can minimize the destruction of these trichomes during harvest. I've got some third-party COAs in here from different farms that have our equipment, showing basically zero loss. We've kind of got a handle on how to harvest this at speed. That's why I talked about some of that stuff earlier. At today's input cost, can you make money? Well, if you're spending $10,000, $15,000 an acre to farm this, $20,000 an acre, we've heard, it's going to be really tough to come out with unless you're using very, very efficient machinery and being very cognizant of your costs. Just another microscopic view of the trichome on the plant. This is some of the product that came off of our clean strip harvester. This is green stripping in the field. The image on the left is buds in a semi-truck. This was harvested at about 6 miles an hour, 16 feet wide, so between 10 and 12 acres an hour. And this picture on the right is a post-harvested bud. If you look in here close, you can still see all the trichomes attached. That's post-harvested, transported, and dried. And the COA is of these actual crops right here that I'm going to show you. But just showing the technique of how you can maximize your yield per acre by not damaging the trichomes. One note here, this crop, the COA I'm going to show you, this is just under 8%. CBD, CBA, which is what's actually produced by the plant, I think it was 8.7%. I'm going to show you this picture that was the field right across the road, a pivot road away, was harvested with the combine. Same genetic, planted by the same farmer, but he sold that crop standing. This is what it looked like when it came out of the combine. This crop that was almost 8% after he combined it turned into a 1.18 because he ruptured the trichomes. See, as I zoom in here, they're all gone. They're all been ruptured and broken off. So harvest selection definitely impacts your yield per acre. We see people silage chop this stuff and combine it, and they think they only lose, 2, 3, 4 points. Well, that's 40%. We see when we combine between 50 and 90% loss of oil content just because of the threshing and the chopping mechanism. And we've done this longer than anybody else, and we see it over and over again. We had people here last year combine a crop that was a 14% crop, and they brought it into us they bought a screen cleaner. We cleaned it. It was at 2% before we cleaned it. After they combined it, went from 12 to 2. We cleaned it and turned it into 4. So CBD's percent by weight, you can play with that. This machine is our clean strip that those buds came out of. This is the actual harvesting head on the top here. This machine up here, product gets transported down a hose and goes into the vacuum chamber, or we use the grasshopper interchangeably with these things. So this is a large machine, but it runs quite fast and it keeps your harvest costs low because by stripping in the field, we've got farmers that spend between $4,000 and $5,000 an acre to hand strip or even buck, on these smaller scale buckers. This machine does it in the field. This farmer, had 600 acres he harvested with 2 people, and it was harvested and shucked with those 2 people. So this is a good technique for that. Doesn't fit everything because it's a little larger scale. This is a custom harvest combine or hemp farm, and they have this clean strip machine mounted on a front end loader. So that's his choice of how he is moving the product around or the equipment around to strip. This is in a Northern California, Southern Oregon field. And if you look here real close, here's some stalks after they ran the machine through, removing the buds in there. This is a little wider spacing we like to see the crop farmed on. We'd like to see it, 24 to 40,000 plants per acre. But in this instance, it did work. So he was hand stripping this. You do get a little bit more stib when you plant wide open than you do if you plant narrower. This is one of our clean cut machines. Wish these were videos, but the video wouldn't play, so we made still pictures. This is in Pennsylvania. Beautiful little cover crop. This guy's a tomato farm. This is one of our 8.5-foot machines. We make these in 8.5, 15, and 18. The clean cut or clean strip machines, the bud stripping machines, are 16 feet or 20 feet wide. But this is, in this instance, this is a whole plant machine. So these whole plants get cut. This is an oversized draper. This is built for hemp. This isn't modified. We build these specific for hemp. Gets cut, transported up this elevator, and put into a truck. This sickle bar will cut 2 3/8 inch diameter stalks at 4 to 5 miles an hour. So it's pretty impressive capacity on that. This guy's a smaller farm, so he took an 8.5-foot machine. We've been making those for 4 years now. This is in Lithuania, a CBD crop that's mass planted at 50 pounds an acre, but he's coming through. If you look here, here's the harvester. He's running, this is a 6R tractor, so that sickle bar is about head high. So he's running somewhere between 8 and 9 feet off the ground. His first field, I got a picture of it, was 15 feet tall, and he was cutting the tops at 12 feet off of the ground and loading them into the machine. In this instance, if you look over here, this is a roller crimper he put on the front of his pacing tractor, and he's just pushing that stalk down. This was a 15-foot machine, clean cut, running in Kentucky after the hurricane. So this crop had been lodged 2 years ago, and they were going through cutting about 12 to 16 inches off the ground. I don't know if you can see it, but there's some stem left. But this was a 40-inch row spacing, 40-inch plant spacing, very good yielding crop. And we were almost going against the rows. You couldn't see the rows anymore after the plants were lodged. So just demonstrating capacity or capabilities of this machine. This is the third harvester that we've got. This is the super clean cut. If you see on the lower left-hand side, it's got a Bish Enterprises Hemp Harvest Works logo on there. We have jointly built this machine. This machine is made for 20 or 30-inch row spacings and then multiples of that. Its goal is to lift lower branches, strip the product off the lower branches, and then cut that off, and then it conveys it out the boom. The offload boom is usually over here. We didn't have it on for this at a show. But right in here where the cursor is, that's a sickle bar. So it cuts between 9 and whatever height you want to run off the top of the ground. And then these big paddle looking guys are the reels. So they're over dedicated rows to hold the plant tall while we cut it. And then the corn snouts here lift these lower branches up and channel it into the throat here so it can be cut. It's a very good option for somebody that has dedicated rows and some genetics that have horizontal or drooping branches. So we can go down and pick those up where in the past those would be skipped. So
Corbett,
those are the, yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to break in for a second and tell you that we're about at the 9-minute mark. We have several questions. I didn't know if you had a couple slides you wanted to hit before we started into Q&A, or if you'd like to go ahead and hop into Q&A.
We're 9 minutes left, you mean?
We have about 9 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me show you this one real quick and
Okay.
a couple more. These are those third-party lab tests. So here's your CBA. This is pre-harvest 7.9. This is post-harvest 8.76 CBA. Here's an instance of that drying machine. Here's a turbine dryer, massive machine for custom farming. That's that really tall Lithuanian crop. What happens if your crop gets pollinated? We built this machinery. This is a seed cleaning and sizing machine. And then we pair it up with these large vacuums. So the flower comes out here and the seeds come out here. If your crop gets pollinated, and there's a very good chance it will. Again, when people look at this presentation afterwards, look through these spreadsheets. These are some percentages and taking today's prices for the commodity at dollars per point, dry acres down here on this side. And then this is your potential gross revenue per acre. So with that, I guess if somebody wants to ask some questions, have at her.
Okay, great. We have several. First one is coming in asking if you have harvesting options for smokable quality flower.
Yeah, that super clean cut machine, that one I showed there is a 5-row, but we're going to make those down to 1 row. So that would be a very viable option. They would have to be hand shucked still because the most of the buds will still be on the stalk. So that would be one option. You can always cut the entire plant down with our clean cut machine and take that in to be hand stripped. Depending on your end market for that, the clean strip machine does a quite nice job of harvesting just buds. That was that one picture that I showed.
Nice.
I'd be happy to talk to people about that, but probably the most likely one is that super clean cut.
Okay, great. Coming from Will, do most farmers have their own methods to process their seed or grain harvest, or is there a shortage right now of grain/fiber processors?
I would say there's a shortage of fiber processors for sure. Most farms, we've got fairly small, very economical grain cleaning and separating equipment. Like our smallest grain cleaner is $10,500. Then scalpers or screen cleaners, those can run between $8,500 up to about $34,000, depends on the capacity. But it's best to have those, this is an opinion, take it for what it's worth, have those pieces of equipment on your farm so that you can get it clean, put a little bit of value added time and effort into it to raise your price to your customer, to your extractor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. Brian had asked during the presentation, was that a Shelburne header?
That Shelburne builds those for me. I went over there and asked them to build a hemp specific platform for stripping the stalk or stripping the buds off the stalk. So when we set those up for pneumatic conveyance, they send people to me to set those up and do the implementation of them.
Okay, good eye there.
It is not a grain platform head, by the way. People think that's a grain head, and it is not.
Okay. Joseph's asking, if you don't have a large farm, you have a smaller farm with limited staff, Do you have equipment for smaller farms, roughly around like 4 or 5 acres, for industrial hemp use?
Yeah, we'll make that one row super clean cut machine. That'll be our smallest, most economical for small scale farming. And
Okay.
then the smaller grain cleaning pieces of equipment. We do have some flower stem separation equipment. It's a little bit geared to the larger market. We kind of we're in a larger agricultural area, so our machinery is just based on larger scale. But we've started making some smaller stuff. But if you got ideas for things you want, give us a call.
Okay, great. Next question. How do you handle drop loss?
Say drop
How do you
loss.
handle drop loss?
I'm not exactly sure what that means. We don't lose a whole, like the clean strip machines, especially when we pair them with the vacuum systems, there's almost no product going out of the front of the machine at all. If you're referring to like if you got a crop that has been seeded and we're trying to extract the seed from the flower, those systems are completely enclosed, so there's no loss in that system at all.
Okay, great.
Hopefully that was the question.
That was. Next question is, what do you have to economically, like an economical dryer solution for 100 acres?
We will have something for that. These will have a batch drying type system that the last batch test we ran was just before Christmas in California. And we did 100,000 pounds of product in 6 to 8 hours. And it was 40 degrees, 100% humidity and raining, and we dried it in that span. And then we'll have a semi-continuous drying system here pretty soon too that we can show people. But that batch system's pretty simple and very cost effective.
Okay, great. Last question I have on the list for right now is, what are you seeing most extraction companies preferring for harvest practice? And then how do you suggest drying to minimize CBD loss?
The clean strip machine where it pulls the buds off of the plant, I didn't get to say this, but it actually dries almost twice as fast as when you have stock in it. And once that you've got that product dried, we're making some very gentle threshing type equipment that's enclosed, and then we draw, if there is dust created, if there's trichome loss in there, we draw that with a vacuum and capture all of those trichomes, because that's where the money is. It all goes up in the dust. So we build those machines to run, we thresh the buds down, separate the seed, and then pull the flower and seed apart and separate those, because the extractors really don't want stock. And so we try to run stuff over our screen cleaners to take those little 1/4 and 1/2 inch pieces of stock out of there, because that makes the extractor's throughput much better. It actually increases the CBD content because CBD is percent by weight. So when you remove product that does not contain oil, you're helping the extractors and you're helping your bottom line because you're adding a little value to it. Hopefully that was the answer. That the last question there?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Any last thoughts before we close off for the day? This has been super informative. That was the end of our questions.
Yeah, take a look at those last 3 slides where I've got the gross revenue per acre. One very important note when you're looking through those, if you've got a crop, a cost sharing model where you're sharing pricing with the extractors, look at that close. Take those numbers and divide them by 2, because you're only getting so much back. And then look at there's a yellow highlighted column in each one of those that says scrap rate. There is a scrap factor in extraction and isolation practices that you need to be aware of. So if you expect you've sent in 100 pounds of product and you think you're going to get a check for 100 pounds, look at that scrap factor, because that is something to be aware of. You won't get the entire backpack. There is scrap rates in these machines. Something to be aware of as a farm. You want to know that so you can make a good decision if this is a viable crop for you. And it is. I mean, there's still I did the numbers on corn this morning at 319 a bushel, average yield of 165 bushels an acre, you're getting $535 gross per acre. So, if you're growing cannabinoid stuff, it's still better money, but you have to control your input costs very, very closely to make money at this.
Yeah, that's great tips. Well, I just want to tell you, I thank you so much, Corbett, for your time today. This has been super informative, and I think that all of our farmers are going to walk away more knowledgeable because of it. So everyone, I look forward to seeing each of you at the next session, which begins at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, where we'll be talking about the business of farming for cannabinoids. And I look forward to seeing you all there.